One of the hardest things to do as a believer is to hold to your faith and hold your ground when your opinion is unpopular. And unfortunately, it can cost you friends, it can cost you opportunities. And this has been a constant theme in Daniel, living an uncompromising life. We see in Daniel an example of standing firm despite what is happening, despite the fact that it is considered a negative and a drawback to be a believer in the God of heaven. Daniel demonstrates to us just how a person is to stand firm despite what kings and what culture is saying. And hopefully we do take that example and follow its strength, because this will become more and more of an issue here in America. It will become more and more of an issue here in America. America has typically made the stakes lower for us to be Christians. We have beautiful blessings from God in the founding of our declaration, the declaration document that was forged, and the Bill of Rights, which were affixed to the Constitution. We have wonderful freedoms that are guaranteed to us, but we have seen folks erode those principles and those freedoms over time. And we are now shifting to a time where it's no longer seen as a positive to be a Christian, to go to church, to be a believer in Jesus Christ. It is now, in fact, a negative in some people's minds if we do these things. We have protections here, but it is something that is slowly leaving us. And like the frog boiling in the pot of water, we don't always see it happening, but it is happening. It is happening. Of course, it is exposing us also to a life that is all too common for believers in other parts of the world, where it is negative to be a Christian there. And you may even find that a choice to become a Christian is a fatal choice. Now, this is something we will consider more as we study the coming Antichrist, but for now we see that this is the case for the children of Israel as they are living under the rule and reign of the king of the north. He's someone we've already studied in Daniel 8, and he will lead many Jews to abandon their faith to try to avoid some worse fate under him. They will apostatize. They will fall away. Some professed believers walk away from their faith when they are faced with life and death choices. So as we think about ourselves and we think about the church in our day, the question is, what separates them from those who remain faithful to God? What separates those who walk away from the faith from those who are steadfast, immovable, and remaining in the faith? Well, we'll look this evening at the description, direction, and desecration of the antagonistic Antiochus. And as we do, we will see that the dividing line between those who walk away and those who don't is the true knowledge of God. It's having a true knowledge of God. And so to begin, let's get back to some history as we first consider the description of the antagonistic Antiochus. The antagonistic Antiochus, and we'll start in verse 21. So we see that in his place, and this is in the place of the previous king of the north, a despicable person will arise, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. The overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and shattered, and also the princes of the covenant, or the prince, of the covenant. After an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception, and he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. In a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest parts of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his he will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them, and he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. He will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army. So the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war, but he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down slain. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table, but it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. Okay, so what is happening there? Well, again, we're walking through this history of that intertestamental period. We've already looked at the fact that these are the two kingdoms of the north of the south, the Seleucid kingdom to the north and the Ptolemaic kingdom to the south, and Egypt. And we have these two kings bashing back and forth as you have these great Syrian wars taking place. And where are those wars taking place? Guess what? As these wars are happening, all the armies are marching right through the Holy Land, through Israel. And Israel's having to put up with all of it. Last time we studied Antiochus IV in verses 10 through 20. And so it should be no surprise as we are continuing this study, and we are now moving on to Antiochus IV. And again, we've looked at him. We talked about him back in Daniel 8 as one study notes. More scripture is devoted to this ruler than to any other Greek king. We learn more about this king in scripture than we do Alexander the Great, who we probably spend a lot more time talking about in school and in popular culture. But this is the king that scripture focuses more on. Remember that in Daniel 8, he was prophesied to be the little whore growing up from the Greek Empire. He starts small, but he becomes powerful, and his wicked reign becomes a type for the coming rule of the Antichrist. And so it is interesting that in the providence of God, we call him Antiochus, and you can see that spelled anti. This is in no way related, but Antichrist. This helps you to remember it. It's not that these words mean that, but Antiochus, Antichrist. Antiochus is a type of the Antichrist. Don't go on record saying pastor said he is the Antichrist. No, he is a type of Antichrist. In fact, some think that as we are reading through Daniel 11 and we get past where we're studying tonight, we get into verses 36 through 45. So while some think that is still talking about Antiochus, it looks like this is actually describing a king that is yet future. And what we'll see next time, Lord willing, is that verses 36 through 45 is actually talking about the Antichrist. And so we'll get into that next time. Antiochus prepares us to learn about the Antichrist, because a lot of what Antiochus does is going to be what the Antichrist does. It is going to be what the Antichrist does. But it is still worth calling the reign of Antiochus one that is Antichrist. It is Antichrist. It is against God's anointed people. It is against God's ways, and it is antagonistic toward God's revealed truth. And so let's begin by considering his rise and his character. His rise and his character. Now, we mentioned Antiochus IV briefly by noting that he was one of the sons of Antiochus III last time. And where did he go? Where was he all this time? Was he at home playing with his Legos? No, he was not. And fortunately, he was captured by the Romans, and he actually was in bondage as a hostage by the Romans for years. For years now, maybe he had Legos over there. I don't know, but he was not at home, unfortunately. But that means that when it came time when Antiochus III was killed in that riot, it was time for a new king to arise. Well, his one son is in bondage as a hostage. Guess what? It's his other son, Seleucus IV, who becomes who is to become king. Antiochus IV, in fact, was the younger brother, so he would not have he would not have been king. It would have been his older brother. But when his brother was murdered, he escaped Roman captivity. And okay, how did he just escape it? Were the Romans involved? Perhaps. He saw a chance to seize the throne for himself, though. Now, if we are just thinking about that, we might be tempted to empathize with him. We might say, oh, it's really sad. He got taken from his dad, from his family. He's, hostage in Rome. Um, Remember that the text here describes him as despicable. He is despicable. We can see that in how he came to power. Seleucus IV had an heir, and it would have been the heir of Seleucus IV that should have been king. That would be then Antiochus IV's nephew. And he is one on whom Antiochus IV was one on whom the text says the honor of kingship has not been conferred. The kingly line is going a different direction. But as I said, Antiochus IV escapes Roman captivity. The heir to the throne, who's going to be actually Demetrius I, somehow becomes a hostage in Rome in Antiochus's place. And with Antiochus free, he is able to maneuver himself into power. And so there's a lot of intrigue that's happening just right here, where Antiochus is able to take over the throne and become the ruler of the Seleucid kingdom. Now, as verse 21 notes, this is a time of tranquility, both for the Seleucids and the Judeans. But Antiochus is working behind the scenes through what the text here says are intrigues, or if you have an English Standard Version, flatteries. And boy, the Bible tells us to watch out for flatteries. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Now, he was the one who got Demetrius out of the way into Rome. He also began greasing the political wheels by influencing, as one study notes, key figures in Syria, promising them attractive rewards if they cooperated with him. And so he is getting himself into this position of power. We see a bit of that in verse 24, where he begins to distribute plunder and booty and possessions among them. As you look at this, some might look at this and say, wow, this is a guy with a lot of political prowess. Another word for this, though, might be weasel. And that is who this guy is. He's a weasel. He is just weaseling his way into power. Now, as this is happening, you might imagine, if you yourself have some kind of a political mind, you might say, okay, this sounds like a really unstable time for the Seleucids. And if you think that, you would be in company with the king of the south. He recognized this. So, okay, look at all that's happening up there. And I'm sure they had their spies that were able to report on things. And they said, yeah, this is a good time. This is a time of political flux. And so in 169, Ptolemy the Sixth believed the time was right to regain Judea and the rest of the territories that he lost. And so he built up what the text here calls an overwhelming army. And he is going to march up to take over what is sometimes referred to as Palestine. He is going to take all of that back. What does he find instead? He finds Antiochus not only ready for him, politically speaking, Antiochus shatters his army. Now, that does tell us that he is a man who understood a few things. But unfortunately, the army wasn't the only thing shattered. Now, again, each of these conflicts, where are they passing? As they go north to south, right in the middle is Israel, right? Right in the middle is Judea. And who is the most powerful man in Israel at that time? Well, it's not a king. It's the high priest, much like during Jesus' day. And in this case, it was Antiochus III. And that is most likely the person the text is referring to here as the Prince of the Covenant. Unfortunately, Onias's brother defected to Antiochus. Now here we see already apostasy. He's willing to turn on his brother, turn on his countrymen, turn on God. Because God's the one who would have allowed the priests to be there. He defects to Antiochus, and he requests the high priesthood, offering him money. Antiochus says, I like money. And so he says, deal. Onias is murdered. And then Antiochus has his man in charge. This is quite the weasel. And he is finding weasels to be in positions of power where he wants them. Now, Israel isn't the only place where family is fighting for dominance. And isn't it great that families sometimes fight like this? It is that way in Israel, and it was that way in Egypt. Egypt might have thought that it was solid. Actually, no, they probably didn't think that it was solid because there had been some intrigue happening there as well. In fact, there was with that military loss with Ptolemy the Sixth, he found a rival at home who is remembered as Ptolemy the Seventh. There are names for each of these guys. I don't want to confuse you with more names, so I'll just stick to the numbers. So Ptolemy the Sixth changed directions. And this is his bright idea. Now think about this. You just went to attack the king of the north. You lost. And because you lost, your family members over here are like, yeah, hey, I think I should be on the throne now. And you say, okay, this is what I'll do. I'll go back to the king of the north, but now as a friend. And I'll get him to help me take care of my family down here in the south. And that's exactly what he did. He went to Antiochus to help and to ask for help in regaining the throne. It's wild. Here they were just having their armies fight. The armies fight. Antiochus is victorious. And Ptolemy comes back and says, hey, Antiochus, you did really well there. You beat me. Hey, great job. Hey, you want to help beat up my brother over here now? And Antiochus says, sure. Of course. I would love that. Why? Because that gives Antiochus a foothold in Egypt. And so now Antiochus essentially conquers Memphis and the rest of Egypt. Not entirely, but he now has influence there. His power is on the rise. And it wasn't through large armies as with others. It's not like he just gathered a huge fighting force of 500,000 people or whatnot to go and storm Egypt, and he took over Egypt. He just takes a small force down there and helps Ptolemy VI the throne. But in the meantime, he gets his foot in Egypt. And he doesn't leave with empty pockets either. He takes money. Because this ain't free, right? Armies are expensive. Even if it's a smaller force, it's expensive. There needs to be funding. And so he finally gets the money that his empire needed since the end of his father's day. Remember this? His father went to attack up in Asia Minor. And what happened? The Romans came in. They end up fighting with the Romans. The Romans humiliate him, Antiochus III. And Antiochus III not only has to surrender to the Romans, he has to pay them reparations he can't afford. Those reparation payments are still on the table. And now his son, Antiochus IV, is finally able to get the money that they need to pay back Rome. And so, verse 24 says, in the time of tranquility, he will enter the richest parts of the realm. He conquered and then plundered Egypt, essentially, accomplishing what his fathers were not able to accomplish, the text says, nor his ancestors. He essentially unified the ununifiable, at least for the moment, under his personage. Now, there's a little bit, when I say that there's a type of the Antichrist here, that this is part of what we're seeing here. He is able to bring these great powers together and unite them. Not exactly a one world government, but definitely a one region government, for a moment anyway. He has the power. And any powerful person in Egypt that might have complained found this generous gifts in their mailbox. Suddenly, when you have money overflowing at your front door, you might not be tempted to complain as much. Antiochus knew how to grease the wheels. And he did it in Egypt, just like he did it in Syria. It's amazing how giving people free money seems to appease them. I wonder if that's why politicians are constantly offering free money to people. Ah, yes, I think there might be a reason behind that. Yes, let's give you free healthcare. Let's give you free education through preschool and through college. Let's give you free lunches. Let's give you free. Ah, maybe someone's trying to curry our favor. Something to keep in mind anyway. That perhaps this pushed the king of the South to become more of an enemy again. Because as he's seeing this, he realizes, and he's very young. He's a very young king. And he realizes, perhaps for the first time, we've been essentially conquered. And maybe he anticipated it on some level. He thought maybe we could deal with it, but he didn't expect that Antiochus would be so successful with some of the Egyptian nobles. And so he decides in verse 25 or verse 24 that it is time to fight back. Verse 25, he will stir up strength and courage against the king of the south with the large army. Why does he do this? Because Antiochus IV Ptolemy VI decides to attack Antiochus again. See, they were friends, they were enemies, and they're friends, and now they're enemies again. And so the king of the south goes against the king of the north. King of the north marches toward Egypt. King of the south gets its army, but Antiochus was again victorious. Antiochus really is doing a pretty good job of maintaining his power. One of the major reasons for Antiochus's victory was that Ptolemy, who I just mentioned was a young king, very young, he was a child when he first rose to power. Well, Ptolemy was really resting on the advice of older, learned people, which typically isn't a bad idea unless they decide to betray you. And that's what had happened. The young king had 2 advisors at his table who betrayed him, and verse 26 mentions that. They eat his choice food, but they will destroy him. Antiochus' army was able to overflow the Egyptian forces. It's almost as if this were planned. And now Antiochus has even more power over Egypt. Now, this wasn't the end of it. Because what is Antiochus to do? Does he just wipe out the king of the south and say, okay, now it's just the Seleucid Empire? That could have been one option he decided to do. But for whatever reason, he thought, okay, that's not the way that I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to help this young king out. Enemies, friends, enemies. Now we're back to friends. And he says, okay, we've had our fight. I'm going to help you stay in power. Because, of course, at this time, everyone's like, okay, Ptolemy, this is it. This is just embarrassing. You don't need to be king anymore. We need someone else for you to be king. And so Antiochus acted friendly toward Ptolemy, and he said, hey, listen, I'll make sure you stay. Because then he owes him something. But at this point, Ptolemy seems to be wising up, and he had learned the game of intrigue. And while Antiochus was feigning friendship, so was Ptolemy. Antiochus was trying to get Ptolemy to stay on the throne so that he would have someone he could control. The devil you know kind of thing. Well, Ptolemy, in the meantime, decided to go to his other old enemy. Remember how he had just turned on, how he had went to his old enemy Antiochus. Now he's going to his old enemy, the other Ptolemy VII. He says, hey, dude, let's do a joint reign. That will unite Egypt once again. And then we will have a force strong enough to push back against Antiochus. And they form an alliance. Finally, Egypt is reunited. And Antiochus is frustrated. He had just been outwitted by this youth he had helped to stay on the throne. Now, we are starting to see quite a bit about Antiochus. And this is a guy that we have studied before, as I said. But we need to see that he is greatly motivated by money in this text, and he got a great deal more wealth in the process. He was money hungry. He was a despicable man. And as we are considering this description of him, just consider this. One commentary explains it this way. The heathen writers describe him, Antiochus, to be an odd-humored man, rude, and boisterous, base and sordid. He would sometimes steal out of the court into the city and herd with any infamous company incognito, in disguise. He made himself a companion of the common sort and the basest strangers that came to town. He had the most unaccountable whims, so that some took him to be silly and others to be mad. Another dictionary notes Antiochus IV assigned himself the title Epiphanes, and so sometimes you'll hear historians refer to him as Antiochus Epiphanes, which means God manifest. But later in life, he took on this name as attested on coinage. However, Polybius assigned him the nickname Epitomes. So you can kind of hear the wordplay. Instead of Epiphanes, it's Epimanes, which means utterly mad. So he's not Antiochus Epiphanes, he's Antiochus Epitomes. He's crazy. He's crazy. And we can see in verse 27 that his heart, just like the heart of the king south, is intent on evil. This is a two-sided man. Now, he has an initial success. But one of the sad realities among the people of God, to bring it back around to the people of God, is that they will be impressed with this man. Obviously, Ananias' brother was impressed with him initially. And he says, no, I'm your man. Let me be high priest here in Israel. There will be some who seem impressive in our lives, and they come with promises that may even personally benefit us. But God's people must be discerning. God's people must be discerning. We have to recognize, okay, this man is a problem. This man is a problem. And as our Lord commanded us, we should be, Matthew 10:16, as shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves, or as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We need to be discerning, because consider not only his description, but also his direction. Second point here, the direction of the antagonistic Antiochus, the direction of the antagonistic Antiochus, verses 28 through 30. We read, "Then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the Holy Covenant, and he will take action and then return to his own land. At the appointed time, he will return and come into the south, but this last time it will not turn out the way it did before. For the ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore, he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard to those who forsake the covenants." Now, what do we have happening here? Well, this man who claimed to be God, is moving in an increasingly godless and anti-God direction. Again, verse 22 points us to the death of the high priest. Antiochus was consenting to that death so that he could install his man. Now he's returning to Egypt with more wealth, though not with the complete conquest of Egypt. He's a little frustrated. Things didn't go quite how he wanted, but he decides, hey, it's time now to focus on the people of God. Now, at this time, there were a couple of reasons for that, historically speaking. Bless you. First, there was an insurrection happening. There were some people who had risen up. This wasn't of God, because obviously it was put down, and he wanted to put down that rebellion. The second reason was political. He loved his culture. He wanted to Hellenize the Jewish people, and so he is pushing that on the Jewish people. And this is what's going to begin a lot more Jewish people wanting to apostatize. There we go. This is actually kind of nice. But yeah, let's have that. gymnasium here. Let's have that arena here. Let's have these things here that the major Greek cities have. We want to be like that. We want to be like everyone else. And while he is doing that, he also looted the temple and killed a lot of people. Now, you would think that discerning people, thinking people would say, hey, this is not a good guy. He just stole from our temple. Like, even if you don't honor God, I mean, come on. He stole from our temple. He killed our people. Wake up. But no, they're like, oh, this guy has something to say. Now, why is he doing all this? Well, the simple reality is that he hated the truth. He hated the truth. The truth of God always convicts and makes a person who is committed to lies feel judged, even if there may not be judgment. And the people of God is the same way. One of the things that is somewhat humorous to me is that when someone finds out I'm a pastor, how quickly their behavior changes. And you all know me. I'm not someone who demands any kind of formalities or anything like that. I think our Lord tells us not to be that way, by the way. For the other pastors out there, we shouldn't love titles or anything else. But I mean, eventually it comes out, what do you do for a living? I have to say pastor. I mean, there's not many other things I could say, you know. Um, I work with a charity that, you know, helps people in need. You know, I'll just say I'm a pastor, right? And people are like, oh, well, you know, I believe in God, you know, and it's just suddenly, you know, they almost feel judged. And I'm not judging them. I'm there maybe to buy some milk at the store or something. You know, I'm not judging people you know, at that time. I might be judging people at other times, you know. Uh, uh, I'm just there, you know, and so, you know, I'll talk to people, and it's a great opportunity for the gospel. But people do feel judged around the people of God. And if you say, yeah, I'm a Christian, I go to church every Sunday, I really believe that the Bible is God's word, it's God's truth. It's interesting the kinds of reactions that may evoke in people around you. Even just living righteously. Some people feel offended by the fact that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. And that's what we see with Antiochus here. And so what would make Antiochus's campaign a little bit better, his almost loss in Egypt, well, he wanted to feel like he had a victory over God before he went back home. Antiochus is frustrated. And so he takes it out on the people of the covenant. And he takes action on them before returning home. Now, if that's him frustrated, what would happen if he were completely humiliated? How might he act then? Well, that's what we see only a couple years later. Because guess what? Antiochus decides to attack Egypt once again. But the text, as the text says here, it says that it will not turn out the way it did before. So where he had moderate success previously, he will have no success this time. Zero success. As one commentary notes, when Antiochus was en route to attack Alexandria with his troops, he was met by the Roman commissioner Gaius Linnaeus, who gave him a decree of the Senate ordering him to withdraw his troops. The ships of Kittim, excuse me, had come in. Ships of Kittim had come in. And these are the same ships that stopped his father. These are the same Romans that defeated his father. It had humiliated the Seleucid Empire. And now Antiochus IV finds that he is stopped in his tracks. And Antiochus would have remembered all this, how the Romans had thwarted his father, how they had demanded so much money. And they've only grown more powerful over the years. You can really see foreshadowing here in history, because obviously the Romans become the power by the time of Christ. But right now, Antiochus is thinking, can we handle this? But if we can't, and I turn around, I'm going to be humiliated. I can't let them humiliate me. And so he requests some time to think it over. This is probably one of my favorite moments in military history. The Roman commissioner responds by taking a vine stick, which may have been the one that he was using for walking. And he walks up to Antiochus. And he puts the stick into the sand. And he walks around Antiochus, drawing a circle in the sand. And he says, make your choice before you leave this circle. What does Antiochus do? He leaves the circle and goes home. What else could he do? What else could he do? That was it. He had to obey, and he withdrew. Now, how do you think he felt about that? If we're all psychologists for a moment, how do you think he felt about that? He was probably pretty mad, and he was probably pretty angry, and he was, in his rage, looking for a target. And guess who he picked? He picked the Jews. And that's what we read here. He became enraged at the Holy Covenant, and he takes action again. What kind of action? Well, as one study notes, Antiochus dispatched Apollonius with 22,000 men and attacked Jerusalem on the Sabbath. It's amazing, by the way, how many people attack the Jews on the Sabbath. They think, okay, this is it. The Jews are ready on the Sabbath, by the way. This just is not a successful plan anymore. If you think, oh, well, they're supposed to be resting on the Sabbath, let's attack them on the Sabbath. No, they're ready for this kind of thing because it's happened so many times in history. But anyway, they attack on the Sabbath, resulting in the death of much of the male population. He also banned all Jewish rites and rededicated the temple to Zeus. The people were no longer allowed to circumcise their sons or follow the Jewish law. They were also commanded to sacrifice swine to other gods, all under penalty of death. And in December of 167 BC, a new altar was erected in the temple, and sacrifice for Zeus was offered on the altar. Daniel 11:31 here identifies this offering as the abomination of desolation. He goes completely against the people of God and what God had commanded. Now, before we get to verse 31, consider also that this pagan isn't done with just all of that. He also says, or he also at the end of verse 30, will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. He is going to try to get more people to apostatize. And this is the whole point of that. He's wanting them to Hellenize. He wants them to reject the true God of heaven. And he wants them all praying to Zeus and perhaps even ultimately praying to him. And so they did They turned away from the covenant. They even had their youth embracing the Greek culture. Those who had been circumcised, we talked a little bit about this in the past, they underwent that painful operation to remove or to mask their circumcision. The circumcision became uncircumcision, as the text talks about. And they were trying their best to become Greeks. They were abandoning God and abandoning the covenant. There will be some so-called Christians who forsake the church the moment things go south. It will happen, and it has happened. We're already living in a time when being a Christian isn't necessarily a positive in culture. It has become more of a negative for many people, as I said before. And if another administration comes in like our previous one, and I'll just say it, if Democrats come into power, it may be that Christians begin to find themselves persecuted. It already was that, where Christians were not allowed to adopt, they were not allowed to foster. Still in the state of Colorado, where Democrats maintain control. If you hold to Christian principles, you can't just adopt, you can't just foster. And then they say, why are you against abortion? Won't you adopt? Won't you foster? And that's just one example. That's just one example among many. If Christians are no longer allowed to participate in culture as much as they did before, and those who speak against the ways of Christ might be rewarded, what are we going to see? We're going to see Christians turning on Christians. We're going to see apostasy in mass. We've got to anticipate this. And we've got to anticipate this with prayerful reflection. First of all, you need to know the Lord. You also need to expect that some who we call brethren might betray us. I'm not saying that so you're looking for people. I'm saying that so it's not a surprise when it happens. There's plenty in the New Testament to talk about this. John addressed this quite a bit. He talks about those who went out from us because they were never truly of us. Prepare yourself. Strengthen yourself. Consider the saints, for instance, who have stood strong for encouragement, like Daniel in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. We could be considering a lot of saints who have stood strong, even in the face of death. And find the strength you need in the Spirit of the Lord, especially as times get tough, as we see next. Let's look briefly here at the desecration of the antagonistic Antiochus, the desecration of the antagonistic Antiochus, the third point here, verses 31 through 35. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice. They will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Those who have insight among the people of God will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. Some of those who have insight will fall, in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Well, there's a lot to consider there, but some of this we've already thought about. Despite the fact that there were some foolish people who thought they would do better If they turn to Antiochus, well, guess what? He's still attacked. That's the thing. You can't trust the bad guy, right? If you've watched any shows, if kids have any shows that you kids have watched, you can't trust the bad guy, right? He's always going to turn on you, and that's what we see with Antiochus as well. Again, he focuses on the temple complex. He does away with the sacrifices. He sets up that abomination by having a statue to a pagan god set up in the holy place. He has a pig burnt on the altar, desecrating that. He is deliberately making common and unclean what God had set apart to be holy. And yet, amazingly, some will still be fooled by apostasy, and they will still be deceived by what? By smooth words, the text says. He will speak of smooth words, like flattery, and people are like, oh, yeah, okay, well, that sounds good. It's hard to imagine, but people will fall for that. When the apostates among the Jews, those who are already inclined to compromise, will be led into full abandonment of their faith with his pervasive speech, his persuasive speech, and by the benefits that he offers. He doesn't have to rely on force here. He's using his words at times. Those hearts that were already set against the covenant find him a ready ally and a smooth path to full apostasy. And that's really part of it here. Some people just want to be in sin. They just don't want to come out in full rebellion against God unless someone gives them permission. And then they can come out in full rebellion. And that's what we see Antiochus doing with some of the Jews. But there are among them also those who know God. Those who know God. And we read that they display strength and they take action. And that's really the key distinction in this entire passage. I want you to see, if you don't remember anything else from tonight, I hope you remember this. If you want to avoid apostasy, you need to know God. You need to know God. And that's why they show strength. That's why they show action, because God is the God of strength and God is the God of action. And they know God and they are moved. It's not merely those who just know about God. It's not those who have a cultural attachment to the covenant. It's not those who grew up in the synagogue, because there were synagogues at that time. We can apply this to church too, right? Those who just grow up in an area where there's a lot of Christianity, those who have gone to church all their lives, their parents are Christians, their aunts, their uncles, everyone was a Christian. What do we see here? They sometimes fall prey because they don't know God. They don't know God. But those who truly know Him, who have a living, personal, saving relationship with Him, those who are grounded in His revelation, those are the ones who stand firm, the ones with their houses built upon the rock. When the winds come and the waves crash, that house stands firm. And the Hebrew phrase indicates that they will be strong, they will act, they will do exploits. And we do see that. History points us to the Maccabean revolt that happens at this time. Judas Maccabees, Matthias started it. His son takes it over. The knowledge of God produces courage and decisive action when the pressure is on. And that shows us that there are times when we need to stand for what is right. There are times. There are times when Christians must take actions through the resources that God grants to us. That's why, incidentally, it is so frustrating to me when God has granted to us tools in the political process and Christians don't use them. Why do we have godless people being elected in this country when we can all go vote? But we have Christians who say, "Well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to use our power. I don't want to do this or that." Yo, let's take action. Let's be firm. Let's stand up. Now, those who have insight among the people will help God's people understand this. And that's what we see. The wise here are those who understand the times and the word of God, and they instruct others. Even in the darkest hour, God raises up teachers to open up the scriptures and help people know God's revealed will. That doesn't mean that people don't die. Many faithful Jews died under Antiochus's persecution, sadly. Faithfulness does not guarantee immunity from suffering. The sword, the fire of martyrdom, imprisonment, loss of property, all fell upon those who refused to compromise. Now, when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them, though in hypocrisy. Sometimes people don't join because of genuine conviction. They just simply do so because they are motivated by perhaps nationalism, perhaps a sense of personal advantage. Perhaps they just want to be on what they perceive to be the winning side. But God's people have to be ready for that. There will sometimes be hypocrites in our ranks, whether we are at peace and persecution hasn't come, or whether we are at a time of persecution and we have hypocrites join our ranks. It just happens that way sometimes. We have to be prepared for that. There have been some Christians who have said, we want persecution to come because that's going to purify the church. Yes, it will purify us in some ways, but that doesn't mean that we will avoid having hypocrites in our midst. We still may have some who are not true. But as we see here, there is a purifying purpose to all of this. And God will control all of this until the end. Now, as we wrap this up here, Antiochus Epiphanes, again, he stands as a type of the Antichrist. And Lord willing, as we go further into the text, we will see that final oppressor. We will see just how that same spirit is reflected in him. And we'll look at that next time. But what is the dividing line between those who stand firm and those who apostatize? Well, it's this: the true knowledge of God. The true knowledge of God. Again, I don't mean intellectual awareness. I don't mean cultural Christianity. I don't mean a claim to faith in easier times. I'm talking about a genuine saving knowledge of the living God that is able to produce fruit in your life, including strength and action when the cost is high. And if you're afraid that you would be able to stand firm at such a time, keep in mind that it is the same Spirit who works in you, who produces the fruit of the Spirit, who will help you to be bold, who will help you to be courageous when the time is right. The question, though, to each of us is, do we know that God who is able to produce that within us? Because if we truly know him, we will display that truth. We will take action. And we will instruct others in the truth. And the more we know God, the more we will trust him when pressure mounts. And the more we know him, the less attractive the offers of the world will be that precede that persecution. In fact, we will be willing to lose everything rather than to deny the God that we know and love. So may the Lord grant to us true knowledge of himself, that we may stand firm amid whatever antagonism may come our way, that we may never apostatize from the faith once for all delivered to the saints.